I wasn't stolen from you. I was saved from you." The wealthy woman couldn't believe these words were coming from her own daughter. After a confrontation at a cafe, she accidentally recognized the long-lost child she had spent more than 2 decades searching for. But what should have been a joyful reunion became the beginning of a new tragedy. Her daughter refused to acknowledge her. Because of her deep-seated prejudice against black people, she lost her child once again. She had always believed that a black person had kidnapped her daughter, but when the truth was revealed, her entire worldview began to shatter. Eleanor Whitmore had once been a woman the world envied, graceful, poised, untouchable in both wealth and power. The name Whitmore carried weight, stamped on the side of high-rises, whispered in the halls of political fundraisers, written in gold on invitations that only the elite received. But all of it, every dollar, every connection, every shimmering fragment of the life she had built, had become meaningless on the day she lost her daughter. Sophia was only 5 when she vanished, a little girl in a yellow sundress with curls as golden as the morning sun. One moment she had been playing on the swings at the Whitmore Country Club's exclusive private park. The next, she was gone. Eleanor had turned her back for mere seconds, just enough time to sip her iced tea and give a polite nod to another socialite across the lawn when the world came crashing down. The police swarmed, the media feasted, and for weeks it was all anyone could talk about. A Whitmore child, stolen in broad daylight. But as the days dragged into months, and the months stretched into years, the world moved on. Only Eleanor did not. She had poured millions into private investigators, scoured every lead, paid off officers, politicians, and anyone who claimed to have even the smallest hint of information. Nothing. Then, after weeks of false alarms and dead ends, a lead emerged, one that latched onto Eleanor's already unraveling mind and never let go. A woman had come forward, swearing she had seen something. "A man," she said. "A black man. A dark-skinned figure, tall, broad, lifting a little white girl into his arms and walking away. That was all it took. No name. No description beyond black. No solid proof that it wasn't an innocent father carrying his own child home." But Eleanor didn't care about facts. Facts were irrelevant in the face of loss. From that moment on, the rage inside her calcified into something permanent, something poisonous, something that painted the world in stark lines of us and them. She had never been fond of them, not really. She had been taught to be polite, to smile at the maids, to sign the donation checks, to nod along when people preached about equality and diversity at galas. But deep down, she had always believed there was a natural order to things. They were different. Less. She had tolerated them when they stayed in their place. But now they were something else entirely. Threats. She stopped hiring them. No black maids, no black chauffeurs, no black secretaries in her company. The optics weren't good, her PR team had warned, but she hadn't cared. She stopped going to places where they gathered, refused to shop in stores that had them behind the counters, turned her nose up at their music, their culture, their very existence. Every time she saw a black man on the street, a flicker of fear shot through her, irrational, yes, but unshakable. One of them had taken her daughter. That was all that mattered. 22 years had passed, and Eleanor had become a woman made of stone. She had learned to live with the loss, or at least mask it, to tuck it away behind designer sunglasses, beneath perfectly tailored Chanel, within the cold steel of a voice that never wavered. But grief is never truly buried. It festers. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the spaces where noise and wealth can't reach. And on days like today, when the world felt particularly hollow, when she could still hear Sophia's laughter echoing in the back of her mind, Eleanor found herself walking without purpose, lost in thoughts of the child she had never stopped searching for. She did not realize where she was headed. She did not notice the way the streets changed, the way the people around her no longer looked like the ones she surrounded herself with. But when she finally blinked back to the present, she saw them. The neighborhood was black. The signs, the businesses, the faces. She stood in the middle of their world, and a disgusted shudder ran down her spine. This was their territory, the kind of place she avoided like the plague. What the hell was she doing here? Eleanor tightened her grip on the leather strap of her purse, her knuckles paling as unease slithered through her veins. She needed to leave. Now. The weight of unfamiliar eyes on her, a different kind of gaze than she was used to, made her stomach twist. These weren't the admiring, deferential looks she commanded in her world. Here, she was an outsider, a foreign body intruding where she did not belong. She turned sharply, heels clicking against the pavement, searching for a way back to where the streets were cleaner, where the people were right. Then she saw it a hospital, modern, well-kept, the kind of place that looked respectable, despite its location. Relief flooded her. If nothing else, she could compose herself inside. Hospitals were neutral ground, run by order, by rules, by people who understood decorum. She stepped through the sliding glass doors, inhaling the sharp scent of antiseptic, willing herself back into control. The waiting area was busy, louder than it should have been, filled with a cacophony of voices, some anxious, some exhausted, some altogether too casual, as if this were some social gathering rather than a place of crisis. Eleanor pursed her lips, distaste creeping in. This was not the kind of hospital she frequented, the kind where people whispered and tiptoed, where the air held the hushed weight of privilege. Her eyes swept the room, landing on the reception desk, where a young black woman in scrubs was chatting with a security guard, laughing at something he had said. Unprofessional. Eleanor strode forward, heels clicking sharply against the tile, expecting immediate attention. Instead, the receptionist kept talking. Eleanor cleared her throat. No response. Her fingers drummed against the counter. Still nothing. Her patience, already thin, snapped. "Excuse me," she said, voice sharp, the kind that usually cut through air like a knife. The receptionist glanced at her, unimpressed, before lazily swiveling back to her computer. "Take a seat, Mom. We'll be with you shortly." Eleanor stiffened. A seat? Shortly? Did this girl have any idea who she was speaking to? She opened her mouth, prepared to put her in her place, when a sudden commotion erupted behind her. The doors burst open as paramedics rushed in, a stretcher rolling forward, someone shouting orders. Eleanor stepped back instinctively, out of the way, barely processing the blur of movement until it collided with her. Hard. A force struck her side, a shoulder slamming into hers, and she staggered, nearly losing her balance. Hot liquid splattered across her silk blouse, coffee, dark and steaming, soaking into the expensive fabric. Eleanor gasped, rage flashing white-hot as she spun to face whoever had dared. A woman. A black woman. A nurse, judging by the uniform, moving too fast, too recklessly. She had been the one to hit Eleanor. She had been the one who wasn't looking where she was going. And now Eleanor stood there, coffee dripping from her ruined blouse, humiliation burning beneath her skin. "Are you serious?" she hissed, voice low, venomous. The nurse, Grace Carter, according to the name embroidered on her scrubs, barely spared her a glance, eyes locked on the patient she was assisting. "Sorry, ma'am," she said, distracted, already moving past Eleanor. That was it. A rushed, meaningless apology. No acknowledgement of what she had done. No respect. Eleanor's breath sharpened, the fury clawing up her throat, demanding release. "That's all?" she snapped. "That's all you have to say? Do you even realize what you just did?" Grace stopped mid-stride, turning to face her fully this time. Her eyes were steady, assessing, not apologetic. "I said I was sorry," she repeated, voice controlled but firm. "I'm in the middle of a medical emergency. If you need assistance, take a seat like everyone else." Like everyone else. The words stung more than they should have. Eleanor was not like everyone else. People moved for her. They apologized when they inconvenienced her. They respected her status. But this woman, this nobody, was speaking to her as if she were insignificant. Eleanor's lips curled. "Of course," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "I should have known better than to expect basic professionalism from someone like you." The air around them shifted. Grace's jaw tightened. The receptionist, the security guard, the people in the waiting area, they all heard it. The weight of Eleanor's words sank thick as tar. A few heads turned. The room quieted. And for the first time, Grace's composed expression cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for something cold and sharp to flicker behind her eyes. A silence stretched between them, tense, electric, before Grace inhaled through her nose and turned away. She wouldn't give Eleanor the satisfaction of a reaction. Eleanor almost wished she had. Eleanor stormed out of the hospital, her pulse hammering against her temples, fury burning beneath her skin. She had been humiliated publicly, by a nurse of all people. Worse, a black nurse who had dared to dismiss her, who had looked at her with that infuriating indifference, as if she were nothing. It made her sick, Her silk blouse, once pristine, clung to her skin, stained with coffee, the scent bitter and suffocating. She pulled her coat tighter around her, blinking against the neon glow of the streetlights as she walked. She had told her driver to leave earlier, intent on composing herself before heading home, but now she regretted it. The cold gnawed at her, the unfamiliar streets pressing in, filled with people she did not belong among. She needed air, space, something to distract her from the rage still clawing at her throat. A few blocks ahead, a small cafe caught her eye. Nothing extravagant, just a modest little place tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store. The sign above the door read Southern Soul Cafe, glowing in warm, inviting hues. Eleanor hesitated, then pushed open the door, a bell chiming softly overhead. The scent of frying butter and fresh cornbread filled the air, rich and homely. The cafe was modest worn booths, scuffed floors, a long counter lined with stools. It was the kind of place she never would have set foot in under normal circumstances. But tonight, her patience had already frayed to its breaking point. She needed something, anything to drown out the frustration still simmering inside her. She stepped toward the counter, scanning the room, and then she saw her. Grace. The same nurse from earlier. The same woman who had disrespected her, standing behind the counter, talking to a customer, her expression calm, unbothered, as if nothing had happened. Eleanor froze. The rage that had been cooling, settling into an irritated grumble, reignited in a flash. So this was where she worked when she wasn't busy spilling coffee on people and barking orders in hospitals. How fitting. Eleanor stepped forward, her presence cutting through the easy warmth of the cafe like a blade. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I should have known." Grace turned slowly, recognition flickering in her eyes before her expression shuddered. "Mom," she said, flat, unreadable. Eleanor gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "What is it you people like to say? Hustle culture. Always working. First a nurse, now a waitress. Tell me, are there any jobs you people don't take?" She saw it. The way Grace's grip tightened around the rag she had been using to wipe the counter, the briefest flicker of tension in her shoulders. But she didn't take the bait. Didn't react. That only made Eleanor angrier. "What, nothing to say this time?" she pressed. "No quick remark? No empty apology?" A voice cut through the air before Grace could respond. "Excuse me." Eleanor turned, eyes narrowing at the young woman who had stepped forward from the kitchen. She was in her early 20s, light brown hair pulled into a messy bun, an apron tied around her waist. But it wasn't the apron or the hair that made Eleanor pause. It was the fire in the girl's eyes, a fierce, protective heat that sent a strange, uneasy feeling curling in Eleanor's stomach. "What the hell is your problem?" the girl demanded, stepping closer, placing herself between Eleanor and Grace. "You think you can just walk in here and start talking to people like that?" Eleanor barely spared her a glance. "This is none of your concern," she said coldly. The girl's lips curled. "It is when you come in here throwing around your entitled bullshit like you own the place." Eleanor's nostrils flared. "You don't even know what happened." "I know enough," the girl snapped. "I know you're standing in our space, talking to my mother like she's beneath you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Mother." Her gaze snapped back to Grace, to the calm steel in her expression, to the way her hands had stilled against the counter. Mother. She had a daughter. Of course she did. These people always did, didn't they? Too many mouths to feed, never enough resources, too many excuses about the system keeping them down. Eleanor let out a slow, deliberate breath, tilting her head. "Well," she said, voice smooth, pointed. "That explains the attitude. Raised by trash, raised to be trash." It happened fast. The girl lunged, and for a brief moment, Eleanor thought she was going to hit her. But instead, she knocked over a steaming pot of soup, spilling it across the counter. The scalding liquid sloshed over the edges, and some of it splashed onto her own leg. She hissed in pain, instinctively yanking up the hem of her jeans, her hands shaking slightly from the shock of the burn. And that's when Eleanor saw it. A mark, a birthmark. Small, just above the girl's ankle, a dark crescent-shaped mark burned into her skin like a whisper of something long forgotten. Eleanor's pulse stopped. The world around her tilted. She knew that mark. She had kissed that mark 1,000 times when her daughter was a baby. had traced it with her fingers as Sophia slept in her arms, had whispered to her that it was a secret just for them. Her breath hitched. Her hands shook. "No," she whispered, her voice raw, disbelieving. The girl frowned, pulling her pant leg down. "What the hell are you looking at?" Eleanor couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her heart slammed against her ribs, wild, erratic. She looked at Grace, at the girl, at the mark. And then, as if in a trance, her eyes lifted to the delicate chain around the girl's neck, a necklace, simple but familiar. Too familiar. Her world fractured. "No," she whispered again, but this time it wasn't disbelief. It was something far more dangerous. It was realization. Her head snapped toward Grace, and everything inside her erupted. "You," she spat, her voice rising, shaking with rage. "You stole her." The cafe froze. Every conversation, every clatter of silverware, every casual murmur of background noise died beneath Eleanor's voice, the accusation hanging in the air like the sharp crack of a gunshot. The girl, her daughter, her Sophia, stared at her, brows furrowing in a mix of shock and confusion. But Eleanor's gaze was locked onto Grace, burning. Her breath was sharp, shallow, her chest heaving as the weight of realization crashed over her, suffocating and electric. "You stole her," she hissed again, louder, each syllable trembling with barely contained fury. "You took my daughter." The words felt foreign in her mouth, like something ripped from another world, another reality. But there was no mistaking it, this girl was hers. The birthmark, the necklace, the shape of her jaw, the curve of her nose, so much of her father in that face. 22 years. 22 years of searching, of suffering, of convincing herself that somewhere, somehow, Sophia was waiting to be found. And now, here she was. Not waiting, not lost, here, with her kidnapper. The room shifted. People were looking now, their eyes flickering between Eleanor and Grace, sensing something about to snap. But Grace didn't flinch. She didn't wither beneath Eleanor's fury the way people usually did. She stood still, steady, unshaken, her hands gripping the counter, her jaw tight. "Lower your voice," she said, voice quiet but firm. Eleanor laughed, a harsh, bitter thing. "My voice? My voice? You have the audacity to tell me to lower my voice." Her hands shook. "You took my daughter. You stole her from me, and she cut off," the rage surging too violently for words. "You act like I'm the one in the wrong." The girl, Sophia Eva, whatever name they had given her, stepped forward, brows knitting deeper. "What the hell are you talking about?" she demanded. Eleanor's eyes snapped to her, wild, pleading. "You're mine," she said, her voice breaking. "You're my daughter." Silence. Ah! A thick, unbearable silence. Eva's expression shifted, disbelief, confusion, something raw and dangerous twisting behind her eyes. She looked at Grace, waiting for a denial, waiting for something to make sense. But Grace didn't speak, didn't move. And that was enough. Eva's breath hitched. "Mom?" Eleanor flinched. The word was meant for her, yet it had been spoken to Grace. The wrong person. The wrong mother. "Don't," Eleanor snapped, stepping closer, desperate, desperate. "She is not your mother. She stole you from me, from your real family." Her voice cracked on the last words, the weight of 22 years of grief finally splintering inside her. Eva reeled back. Her lips parted, a million thoughts slamming into her at once, crashing, colliding. The scar on her knee, the way she never looked like Grace, the old nightmares, the inexplicable feeling of something missing. "No, no." She turned to Grace, her voice uneven, uncertain in a way it had never been. "Tell me she's lying." Grace's fingers curled against the counter. Her throat moved as she swallowed, the first true hesitation in her demeanor since this began. That was all it took. Eva staggered back. "Oh my God!" Eleanor's heart seized. This was it. This was the moment. She was getting her daughter back. She reached for Eva, her child, her baby, but Eva jerked away, breath ragged, hands shaking. "You lied to me," Eva whispered, voice barely there. Grace exhaled slowly. "I saved you," she said. Silence. Eleanor felt something fracture. "Saved me?" Eva's voice rose higher, sharper, a storm building fast. "Saved me from what?" Grace's jaw tightened. "From them," she said. "From what they did to you." Eleanor stilled. A different kind of silence flooded the room, now thicker, darker. Eva froze. Eleanor's breath hitched. Grace's gaze locked onto Eleanor's, her expression cold, sharp, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. "You don't know, do you?" Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Know what?" she demanded. Grace looked at Eva. "Tell her," she said softly. Eva's lips parted, but no words came out. Her fingers trembled where they hung at her sides. Eleanor's patience snapped. "Tell me what?" she barked. Eva swallowed hard. "I don't remember you," she said, voice hollow. "I don't remember any of it." Eleanor's world stopped. "I was taken," Eva continued, her voice like something far away. "But I wasn't just taken. I was hurt. I don't know how long. I don't know who. But I know I must have fought, because she broke off, exhaling sharply. "They hit me. They must have. Hard enough that I forgot." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "I was unconscious when David found me," Eva said, eyes flicking briefly to Grace. "I woke up in a hospital. I didn't know my name. I didn't know anything." She let out a breathy, broken laugh. "I was a ghost." Eleanor shook her head. "No," she said, desperate, unwilling to accept it. "No, that's not possible." Grace's gaze was steady, merciless. "I was not stolen from you." Her voice was razor-sharp, final. "I was saved from you." Eleanor jerked back as if struck. Something inside her shattered. Eva's breath hitched. She turned, stepping toward the door, everything about her spiraling. Eleanor reached for her. "Sophia, wait." But Eva was already walking. Already gone. Eleanor stood frozen, the door swinging shut behind Eva with a hollow finality that rattled through her bones. The cafe had not resumed its normal rhythm. The patrons still watched, silent, their faces unreadable. Grace had not moved. She stood behind the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes locked onto Eleanor with something that was not pity, not anger, something worse. Eleanor's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts, her heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to escape. She had won. She had found her daughter, and lost her in the same breath. Her mind screamed at her to chase after Eva, to pull her back, to force her to understand. But the words Grace had spoken moments ago, cold, merciless, absolute, echoed louder. "I was not stolen from you. I was saved from you." The truth wrapped itself around Eleanor's throat like a noose. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Sophia Eva was supposed to run into her arms, to break down, to beg to be taken home. But instead, she had looked at Eleanor with something closer to horror, as if the very idea of belonging to her was worse than being lost. Eleanor's stomach twisted violently, nausea rolling over her, the weight of it, the shame, the years of blindness, the endless, seething hate that had driven her into the wrong war crashed down all at once. Her knees nearly buckled under the force of it. "I didn't know," she whispered, barely a sound. Grace let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders shifting not in relief, but in resignation. "You didn't care to know," she said. "You never asked what really happened. You wanted a villain, and we were convenient." Eleanor flinched. She could deny it. She wanted to deny it. Wanted to summon the rage again, wanted to point out that Sophia had been hers first, that no matter what had happened in the past, she was still her mother. But the fire had burned out, leaving only the bitter taste of ash. "I thought she was dead," Eleanor murmured. Grace's expression flickered, just for a second, before her gaze hardened again. "And I thought you'd be better than this," she said. Eleanor inhaled sharply. The world around her blurred at the edges, the walls of the cafe closing in, the whispers of the onlookers pressing down like a lead weight. She turned on her heel, walking out before she could collapse right there. The streets were dark now, colder. She walked aimlessly, her body numb, her thoughts unraveling. She barely remembered getting into her car, barely registered the silent ride home, the house looming before her, vast and empty. The second she stepped inside, the loneliness sank its teeth in deep. 22 years. She had built this mausoleum of a home around a ghost, filled its empty halls with framed photos of a child that no longer existed. She had let rage carve its place inside her, had let it dictate the way she saw the world, the way she treated people, the way she hated, and for what? For nothing. She had spent her whole life looking for her daughter, and now, for the first time, her daughter knew she existed, and she did not want her. The weight of it dropped her to her knees. For the first time in 22 years, Eleanor Whitmore wept. The next week passed in a haze. Eleanor did not leave the house. She did not eat, did not return calls, did not step foot in her office. She did not think about the company, the board, the charities that bore her name. Nothing mattered. But grief had a way of forcing change. And so, for the first time, she looked. She hired a new investigator, but not to find Sophia. She asked him to dig into the truth, the real truth. What had happened to her daughter? What had David Carter risked his life for? Who had taken her? How had she ended up in that nightmare? And when the report came back, it broke her. The men who had taken Sophia had not been strangers to the system. They had been wealthy, respected, hidden behind money and power, the very things Eleanor had always assumed made someone good. They had stolen children and trafficked them like property, and she had spent 2 decades blaming the wrong people. She had given power to the lie. She had fed the hate. It was too much, too much. So she did the only thing left to do. She stood before cameras, before the world, and told them everything. She confessed. Her anger, her ignorance, the damage she had done. She spoke the words she never thought she'd say. I was wrong. She funded investigations. She donated millions to help the community she had shunned, created foundations in David Carter's name to support children like Sophia, children who were taken and discarded, children who had no voice. She did what she should have done years ago. But none of it mattered if Eva didn't see it. And she didn't. Not at first. Eleanor saw her in the news, sometimes small clips, a glimpse of her at a rally, a passing mention of her advocacy work. She had found her purpose in helping others, in making sure no one else had to live the way she had. But she never called, never reached out. And Eleanor never expected her to. But then, one evening, nearly a year later, the doorbell rang. She opened it, and there she was. Eva stood on the front steps, hands shoved into her jacket pockets, eyes wary but not cold, not unmovable. I saw what you did, Eva said, voice quiet. I don't know if it changes anything, but I saw it. Eleanor nodded, throat tight. She didn't speak, didn't push. Then, after a long silence, so long Eleanor thought she might never hear it, Eva exhaled softly and said, "Can we talk?" Eleanor's heart stuttered. She stepped aside. And for the first time, after 22 years of searching, her daughter walked toward her. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.